Okay, well, this is our first um, session that we're running with Shaun Mudd Wallace, and it's a there are two sessions today, and it's a masterclass, basically looking at production and using the studios. And basically, what we're doing is we're going to pick your brains a bit.
Okay.
And film it. So the way we're going to work it this morning, I'm going to try to sort of preempt a few sort of questions and stuff like that to get the thing rolling. But if there's anything that you want to ask, or you just want to, sort of get involved, feel free to just jump in and ask questions. Because it's really about you getting something out of it, and being relevant to things that the processes that you would go through if you were in the studio, or things that you want to know about studio use, or problems that you might have had, and really it's the man to answer these questions. This afternoon we'll be doing some playback sessions, we'll be doing some mixes, and I'll be looking at how they were constructed and put together, so it'll open it up and be a bit more technical. So the kind of thing, so the sort of practicality stuff of making up different instruments, how to get certain sounds, if you would leave that to this afternoon. And really this morning's more to do with like sort of roles, sort of responsibilities, how to get the best out of a studio, budgets and things like that there, even through to what labels and stuff might be looking for in terms of how to work with your band and stuff, and get the best out of your band as well when it's in the studio. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. So I know we've all sort of dabbled a bit in recording and been in recording studios at different points and have had various experiences, some positive, some negative. So bring them in as well. It's better that this is it's about real stuff than it's about just the theory of here's what you may do if you go into a studio. The reason why we're having this is because although it backs up the city and guild stuff that we do, there is a tendency for that all to be like a bit educational, and what we're concerned about is that we're getting more of a real practical sort of idea from people who actually are working with this all the time, right? And it'll give you a bit of a leg up whenever you're getting into the studios yourself, and you can be more confident about using it. So, well, can I just ask you, first of all, like, how did you first get into working in studios and recording production?
Okay, well, professionally, the first thing I did was I worked for the BBC for 3 years. I trained in engineering training centre over in Wood, which is south of Birmingham, Evesham. And over there, you kind of learn all the basics of like broadcast end of recording rather than the musical commercial end of recording and stuff like that there. Though you do little bits and pieces of visits to various studios, like we would go to Pebble Mill in Birmingham. We would look at how some of the music was recorded there with in those days it was called the Midlands Big Band or something like that. So you did a lot of stuff that's created for what was then Radio 2. Radio 2's more or less become now what Radio 1 was then. It's kind of grown up with the music a little bit. So we would have learned all sorts of broadcast techniques, which would have included like sports, outside broadcast, music, current affairs, all the different aspects of just regular broadcast stuff. And you learned it under pressure. So you basically, it was like doing a university course, a 3-year university course in about 6 months. So you basically, instead of wandering in and doing one lecture, like it started at 11 o'clock and then coming back and being exhausted and going drinking coffee or beer or whatever for the rest of the day, you actually had 9 till 1 o'clock solid lectures. You had a 1 hour lunch break, and you then did from 2 until 5 or even 4:30 every day, Monday to Friday. And then you had a test on Friday, and you had on the Friday you had to have a 60% pass rate on the test.
What was that test?
It was a multiple choice audio-visual test where you were presented with like 5 answers probably on various subjects, including like things like transistor theory, basic electronics, even broadcast situations. If you were in a situation where the video mixer had a heart attack, the vision mixer had a heart attack, what would be the procedure to keep the program on the air? Stuff like that, and then they would give you 4 ridiculous answers and 1 right answer, but the answers would only be left on the screen for anything between 5 seconds and 25 seconds, and you had to have your one of your 5 buttons pressed and say that period of time. So the whole thing was designed to give you an impression of what it was like to work under pressure, as opposed to like commercial studios where you just kind of hang around and have cups of coffee, or TV, which is another thing. The thing I found out about broadcast was TV is just the ultimate bore. You hang around for hours and hours and hours waiting for cameras to get the shots, and then sound gets a 5-minute burst at the end of it to get it right, and you're kind of stuck on at the end, and it's ultimately very boring, So then we did lots of radio broadcasts where you would go out and do songs of praise and stuff like that on a Sunday, and you would do sport. You would go up to Windsor Park or up to whatever and do a football match or something like that. And then you do maybe rallycross, where you would do the Ulster Grand National down at where's it, down Lisburn, down Royal, down which I had a funny story about, but I'll tell you about that later. But so you do like a whole general thing. Then you go back over to London after your first 6 months course, if you're fortunate enough to pass that, and you do your sub courses where you're basically you specialise in various things. So I did music, and I was seconded to basically Television Centre, where I did a bit of music there, and then I also worked in Broadcasting House with the BBC Big Band, and then I did Top of the Pops for a wee while, and then I did John Peel's show, the live sessions up at Maida Vale for that with Tony Wilson, and just generally you learned how to record a band in 3 hours, and at the end of the session you walked out with a tape in your hand that was broadcastable, so you were kind of still under pressure, but it was a bit closer to what it was like working in a commercial studio. Well, I subsequently found out it was closer. Then I discovered when I came to Belfast after that, it was only in London that it was closer, because they had a clue what was going on within the commercial world, whereas over here, it was very much the system and the BBC, and and you would say to somebody there, well, what do you do? Oh, I'm with the BBC. What do you do? I'm with the BBC. And I said, I mean, what do you specialise in? And it was just, we're over there, it was much more cutting edge, because the commercial guys mixed with the broadcast guys, and it was all a much healthier environment to work in. But I didn't stay, unfortunately, and I came back, and then after that I got my own studio together. And there was,
You wanted to work, you say you wanted to work with music, did you?
well, I decided I wanted to work with music, and also decided I didn't want to work for the BBC, because basically you had somebody, usually who was your immediate superior, making twice as much money, who used to, bump off every day and leave you to do all the work and do all the edits. So
Take all the credit.
yeah, pretty much. Well, at that time I was like early 20s, so I inherited a bit of diabetes at that point. So they thought, oh, better look after this guy for a while. So they stuck me in Studio One with Ulster, what was then BBC Orchestra, it became the Ulster Orchestra. I amalgamated with the Ulster Orchestra. So I did nothing but recorded orchestra for 3 months solid. So I really got to know, how to make orchestras for what was called classical music, and there was a pop making arrangement, and there was a classical making arrangement, which one was for Radio 3 and one was for Radio 2. So you basically learn all how to correctly make acoustic instruments, and how to get the positions, spatial imaging, how to make an orchestra sound like an orchestra when you stood in front of it, and how to do that and get it down onto a couple of speakers and make it sound nice and stereo, that kind of thing.
So then you decided that you wanted to build your own studio?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I actually decided before I went to the BBC I wanted to do that, but
Is that Homestead?
That was the original homestead. The original homestead studio was in a hopper, right out in the middle of a field, like in a turkey shed that we built with about the first third of the turkey shed building, which was probably about the size of this room, the actual studio part of it, and there was a control room which is probably about a quarter the size of this room, stuck on the end of it. Then we had 200 bales of hay, and then nothing. But what I did was I used to stick mics down the far end of it and fold back speakers out, and you could get the sound of the big bit of the room that we weren't using. So that was the first artificial reverb or artificial sound stage that I had experience of. And we did quite a lot of stuff there. We did all the Belfast punk stuff and all the kind of good vibrations things.
But there was a lot of
Did the Outcasts, did all that stuff. Did surely, yeah.
There was a lot of rock bands then that came to you. And
Quite a lot of Belfast bands.
Was there nothing around then?
There was basically what there was like in North and around Belfast area was Outlet in the middle of town here, and they just did pure. It was pure Irish country and a bit of traditional. A few party songs and stuff like this here. They used to use the same backing tracks for the Catholic songs and the Protestant songs, and just change the singers and keep the same backing tracks to save money and stuff like that. So they had the market covered and that anything. So I didn't want to get into that, and I didn't want to get into the other one, which was slightly more upmarket, which was Emerald, which was up at Temple Patrick or Mollusk, and that was it was owned by Phil Solomons, who originally owned Decca, the Phillips label over in London in the 60s. That was a huge label in that time.
Yes, you own Decca?
Yeah. So I didn't really want to get into all that. I wanted to have a kind of like a rock studio, and there wasn't one. There was Windmill Lane in Dublin. There was no provincial studios in Ireland at all. There was nothing in Galway or Limerick. None of those studios had started up at that point.
What year was this?
The original homestead started in I left the BBC in 78, so it was the same time as I was in the BBC, so it was early 78. And we were there for quite a while. And then that progressed from an 8-track studio to then we bought a 16-track Ampex tape machine, so we had 16-track on 2-inch. I bought that one from Nigel Gray over in Surrey Sound, and he recorded the first 3 Police albums and that, so I was like, everybody thought, oh, everyone's going to sound good because the Police albums were recorded on, it was like, yeah, but it didn't work out that way. So it was basically nearly all kind of little rock bands and punk bands and stuff like that from Belfast who would arrive up with a van load of cans of beer, whatever, arrive in, just 1, 2, 3, 4, away you go, and just rattle it out there. And so we did loads of stuff like that there. Got a lot of stuff on the radio and Terry Hilly stuff out of the records and stuff like that. But there were a couple of studios that came and went around Belfast. Davey Wizard had a studio, and he did quite a few of the Good Vibrations recordings and stuff like that as well. Then I get into a whole scene of doing record label stuff after that, and I thought, well, I'm going to have to move somewhere else because it just isn't big enough, the place we had up there. So we purpose-built a place down in Randallstown, which is the real Homestead Studios. Were you down there? I thought you were, right? And that was in 19...
I would have been down around 89.
This was 83, we started there, and so basically it was 24-track, and it was we were going 24-track, and that was kind of the first one around here. I think there was a couple of 16-track and 2-inch, but I think we were one of the first 24 tracks, and I got a new board at that time. I had an Alan Heath Syncon, which is like about the size of a bit of the table there, so which is quite big for them as well. I actually got that in a Hawthorne and took it down into Randallstown, and then I had about 4 or 5 different boards in there. But things got quite big in Randallstown, and we got We had the old Ray Whistle test over and the Tube over and all those people. It was like, just never stopped. It was just so.
Bush turkeys.
And the Bush Turkeys. Bush Turkeys was early 90s. That would be
We've been there.
Aye. But basically, just everybody recorded there. It was like, I actually worked out the other day, I recorded nearly 1,000 bands, which is like ridiculous when you think about it, and I can remember probably about 50 of them, and I'd be hard pushed, but I will remember. It's funny, I meet people from time to time and say, do you remember me doing this? And they would give me, and I would remember the name of the song, and I kind of go, oh, you did that, and yeah, I remember now, and it kind of slowly comes back to you.
Would you remember the song to be heard?
Probably would, yeah. I would recognize the room more than anything else, and I would recognize the kind of my style. I would recognize me on them. I would know
At that point, you were recording like a lot of different type of music, weren't you? Like, just give us an idea of like just sort of.
Well, you do you always, when you work in the studios, everybody thinks, first of all, that you're going to be recording stuff that's successful. 99% of the time, you're actually recording stuff that's trying to be successful and doesn't end up being successful. Ends up just basically on the scrap heap. But you got to keep going, and you got to remember that if it wasn't for the people that are writing the songs and performing and going out and doing them live and stuff, there, people like us wouldn't be in a job. So you kind of have to give everybody, their dues and sort of say, well, fair play to you for trying. And then you go through a bit of a period where you're going behind the mixing desk, and you're kind of going, oh, I know what you should sound like, and you're telling people what you should sound like, and you got to get out of that habit very quickly, because I think thankfully I got out of it fairly early, but some people would disagree with that, but you kind of have to realize why you're there and what the reason is. I mean, a lot of people with sessions, they head into a session and they don't think about what the purpose of the session is. Why are you actually there? How long have you got to do it? And what's your aim? What do you want to come out of the session with? And I think it's pretty important, like from a production point of view, to decide before you start and have a bit of a think about it. At the end of today's session, how far do I want to get in this project? Or because a lot of bands actually are very enamored about being in the studio. They turn up at the studio and just think, right, we'll record forever, and they don't realise, number one, it's going to cost them money, and number two, they deserve something for their money, so, well, they think that all the time anyway, but the producers got to realise they deserve something for their money, and they deserve something for their effort,
So then, would you advocate to a certain degree that inside your preparations for the production session, for the recording session, taking in time, like for example, for mixing as you go, or or especially like for if you were tracking, or
well, since recall became more and more common, especially like recall in things like Pro Tools and Cubase and stuff like that, it's easier to mix as you go along because you're always improving the end result. But kind of in the early days, it was more or less the tracking session was very removed from the mixing session. And it was almost like track. Now we'll mix, all change, everything back to zero, start from scratch, start from the kick drum and work back up again. Whereas now you more or less start with the original session, which remains intact, and you either add or take away things from it, but you basically haven't lost touch with the original thing, which is a benefit from my point of view.
So when a band is going into the studio, right? I mean, a lot of the time you'll go into the studio and there'll be you and the engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So what about this term producer? Where does a producer come into? What is a producer and what do they do? And why is it a good idea to have one, or should you have one?
I think you should have one in that it's always good to have an objective look at what you're trying to do, because if you're getting on with the job of doing the playing, doing the writing, and you're very involved in the project at that stage, you can't really stand back from it or step back and have a look at what's really going on. And sometimes there needs to be somebody there to get rid of the bad ideas as well as to keep the good ideas. So you need somebody who can subtly be there and say, I don't really think that's the way you should be going there. Why don't you try this? And there's a lot of mind games that go on where you realise you maybe get some kids come along and they're 17 years old and they're full of energy and stuff like that there. But if you were to let them loose in the studio for a week, you know, they would come out with nothing at the end of the week, because it would just be, look how much fun we're having, and then they would get into arguments and stuff. So you need basically a referee there to start with. You need somebody who's going to step back and listen, and you need somebody who's going to realise their good ideas and trash their bad ideas without making a big deal of the whole thing. So I think you do need a producer.
And what about, you know, between a producer and an engineer? What's the difference there?
You keep getting asked this because nobody really, it's kind of hard to differentiate. Sometimes you get a lot of producers stroke engineers, but there are people who are very good at organising things and, you know, going through the technical side of things, but they just need a little bit of help making liaison with somebody who can look at the musical side of things, because not all engineers are necessarily musical, or should they be either, because sometimes people are very good with the computer, they're good at organising file paths and organising, keeping things grouped properly, and, you know, and saying, right, if we do this way and we do this way, and keeping tagging things technically in an organisational way. But the producer is probably going to be a little more a member of the band. So what I always try to do is I join the band or join the artist, and we form a kind of team for the project. And then we say cheerio at the end of it, you know. So it's all very much my input is realising their ideas, but also suggesting things. If I hear something, well, I think, why don't you try this? And it's probably my idea, but a good producer, here's a tip, is making the band think that all the good ideas were theirs and not yours, you know, and then they're going to love you at that stage. But you always got to remember that these guys are they're your boss.
Well, would you help then if they if a band came to you with a budget? Would you help them then work that budget out in terms of how it could be spent in recording, whether their expectations were realistic within that budget?
Yeah, well, I would probably work backwards with budgets. A lot of people think, you know, especially now as opposed to then, you've really got to divide up your budget up among recording and then presentation and then marketing and all this kind of stuff. And people forget about that. And they spend a load of money recording, and they haven't sat down at the beginning and thought, well, why am I making this record? And you have to get past the ego trip of making a record and kind of going, oh, that's wonderful. Or the other ego trip, I played everything myself, you know, share it out a bit and, you know, allow other people to become involved to make your project better than it would have been if it had just been you. So it's not just a producer and an engineer, it could be anybody, other musicians and stuff like that there. Sit around and involve other people in the whole thing and seeing what they can bring to it as well. Because you'll find when you get to the record company stage, they try to hijack the whole thing anyway and tell you, you know, well, we kind of like it, but we'd like to rework it. You know, you're going, what? You know, where were you when we were making it? You know, and you get a lot of that kind of people stepping in, you know, after the case.
Working with composers and things like that.
Well, composers, again, you're just trying to realise their ideas and saying, well, they're with proper composers, you know, in the old school sense, they know which instruments and things like that they want to use anyway, but they not always know how to put it together technically in the situation. Let's say you're recording a drum kit and you want to record it with piano, and you want to record it with maybe double bass or something like that there, or electric bass, and you might have to help the composer to make a call between the double bass and the electric bass, because technically it's an easier job if you want to record those instruments at the same time to record the electric bass DI'd than it would be, you know, with the double bass beside a drum kit. So you've got to guide a composer through just the same as you'd have to suggest to a band. It would be better if you all played at once, or would it be better if you just put the drums and the bass down with a click track and a guide vocal, or is it you get a better feel with everybody together? And from my point of view, I always prefer to do everybody together and then sort it out, you know.
And what about if there's conflict, you know, like say between the band and a label, you're funding the project and you've got a bit of a sound, you're working as producer on it. You know, how do you resolve those conflicts? How do you?
You always fight the band's case.
You always fight the band's case.
Every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're in the band, you join the band. You know, you kinda, well, you explain to the band that how much they have to play the game.
Have you got an example of the kind of thing, disagreements that can happen?
Well, we did a band at one stage where we did the mixes over in Sony, over in the Hit Factory in London. We'd done all the recording back in Randallstown. Did the mixes and came back to Randallstown to do another part of the session. The record company said, "We love it, but the hi-hat's a bit loud," you know? And you're kind of going, why are they saying that? Because I mean, if they bought the latest Stones record or whatever, they wouldn't question how loud the hi-hat was, but it was just because they said they could. So we basically just dug in and said, well, it's our hi-hat and that's where we want it, you know. And we ended up getting the way, you know, we got our way with it, you know. But you do, as I say, you do get a lot of interference.
Would you say, like, in a situation like that, it's like you could do the magic wave? You know what I mean? It's like in the live situation where it's like, I could have a wee bit more of that.
Yeah.
There you go.
The dummy faders situation, you know, I've done that a few times as well. I had one guy from a record company, and we did the session, and I suggested that we use a string quartet on it, and he said, "How much is that going to cost?" And the all the usual arguments about money. And I got my way, and eventually we got the string quartet in, and we were doing the mix. And the guy from the record company came over from England, you know, and he was sitting in while we were doing the mix. And I had the whole desk all labelled, and I had strings on a pair of faders, you know. And it was a wee short guy, a wee tubby guy, you know, and he shouldn't be saying that, but he was basically sitting, we were doing the mix, and he said, "Can you not make the strings a bit louder?" And I said, and they were fine, you know. And I said, "Well, I think they're maybe all right." He says, and he then went on and on through the session, and about an hour later he was still going, "Really want to hear those strings." And I knew it was because he'd spent the money on them and he wanted them to be loud. And I said, I think, tell you what, I'll give you a fader and you put them wherever you want. So just gave him a dummy fader, wrote strings on it, you know, going nowhere. And his wee knuckles were white, pushing it up against the end stuff to try to get it louder, you know, this year. And at the end of it, he says, "Great." And then as the credits come out, and it had mixed by his name and then my name after it, this year, as if he had done the mix himself, you know, and all he was doing was pushing a couple of dummy faders. But you have to play the game with record companies, but you always take the band's side, because it's their music. The record company are just people who take a can of beans, put it on the shelf and sell it. And they're good at that, so you got it. And then they also lend the band money to be able to do this, but they take back off them again by saying, "Oh, we spent 12 grand taking photographs of you, so you can't have that bit of the profit," you know. Or we had a graphic designer who did that, and you know, so you can't have that either. So it all gets clawed back. So you don't really need their money.
What about the bands? There's a lot of bands that now are very interested in what they call like an analog sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, going to studios and getting an analog sound. I mean, what are they really after? You know,
well, I take it you've all mixed in the box in some kind of program. Have you used Cubase or something like that? There, you know, the way you've got all your mixings done with virtual faders on the screen, and you mouse them up and down and stuff like that. There. Well, when you actually bring that sound out via an interface and bring it up in individual channels on an analog desk, the difference between what you get just coming out left and right out of a box and what you get when you split those signals up and put them through an analog chain, part of the chain, is day and night. The separation's better, you know, the sound's better, they're more solid, the whole thing's far better. So that's people like the analog sound because they can't put their finger on what it is, it just sounds better. And I've heard hundreds of people trying to define it. It just sounds better, believe me. You know, no matter what you do, they'll always sound better with sort of a bit of
A lot
analog.
more hands-on as well.
It is, yeah. Well, there's less recall and stuff involved usually, you know. But I find that even if you take a couple of channels and put some, like maybe some backing vocals through it, just do a tiny little bit of, you know, high end, you know, chill EQ on the top, you know, and just basically the whole thing just opens up, and you could play with digital EQ for 2 hours and still not get that, and all it takes is that with analog, and just the whole thing just comes to life, you know.
Is that only with expensive analog equipment, or could you get away with cheaper stuff?
You pay what you pay for what you get. So really, at the end of the day, but some of it's ridiculously esoteric and inflated. You know, I mean, I've got microphones. I have one particular microphone that's worth about $5,500, and I have another microphone that's worth probably about 500 quid. And there's not a lot to tell in them. It is basically a subjective choice. You know, just you can kind of go at the end of the day. There are some particular items of equipment that sound absolutely brilliant, you know, and there's no taking away from it. You know, they're worth the money, but you usually hire those out, you know, because they're telephone numbers. But it's always nice to have a bit of analog in the chain.
So there's a lot of talk these days about people not being able to capture like the sounds that inspired them, like, you know, say from the classic era of rock and roll recording, even from the 1950s right through to the 1980s. And I keep coming across a lot of bands that come to me and go, we've been trying to get this sound. We all like the Stones, or we all like Elvis, but you know, we can't get the sound. The sound never gets there. What's happening there?
You see, the funny thing about it is the gear that they used back then, the sounds were always there. But it was a matter of taste. You didn't have bass and drums being pushed up in the mix the way that sort of came along with bands like the Beatles. Before that, it was very much all the top end instruments and the voice, and then all of a sudden you started hearing a kick drum and a snare drum and stuff like that there, which normally had been buried in reverb or spilled in the back of the studio somewhere. But it's the same. It was the same microphones, the same compressors, and the same channels that they were going through to get that. It was just a matter of taste. So, I mean, a lot of it's not really down to the equipment, it's down to what the flavour of the month and what has become the definitive kind of sound of a good sound. That's a matter of taste. It's not really just down to, you know, has the gear got better or worse? I mean, a lot of it's down to what people have come to realise is going to last. The same stuff that sounded good in 1970 is still going. You'll still get bands come along and say, "I want to sound like Black Sabbath," you know, and you're kind of going, "Well, that's like 40 years ago," and they're going, and "Has it not got any better?" Well, it hasn't really. It's just changed. It's the fashion of how it should sound. I mean, during the 80s, it became very drum based. The whole sound became like it was more important what the drums sounded like than what the song was. So everybody was going for this really tight, polished, you know, super expensive, big drums and big reverbs and big delays and everything. And everything sounded huge. When you play it back now, it sounds tiny. And you go back to 1972, 1973, and it sounds really big. You know, so there was a kind of return to the old values, and then everybody thought, right, let's go back to using that old gear, that's what's doing it. But it is to a certain extent, and what they've done now is they've kind of taken like the microphones from like 1950, 1960 and stuff like that there, they've looked at them again and they've rebuilt them almost identically to sound that way, but with more reliable parts, because the parts were terrible back then, you know. I mean, everything sounded bogging. It was really, really, really bad, you know, unless it was maintained properly. Stuff was always going wrong. So don't let anybody tell you, you know, it actually was nice to work with 24 track on 2-inch. It was awful. You had to you had to go into the session every day for about half an hour before you started and line up the tape machine, which was just torture. You know, coming in with a bit of a hangover from the night before and 1K tone going boo through your head, and you had to just go around with a little screwdriver and look at these little tiny meters in the front of the machine, line it all up for half an hour before you even start it. You do any of that now. You turn on the computer and go, and there's recall a session from 6 months ago, and it sounds exactly like it did 6 months ago. I mean, you guys have no idea how luxurious that is to do that, because we had just like, I used to have tape ops working for me down in Homestead, and it used to be, right, we finished work with that track, after lunch we'll work with that track, and the whole lunch hour was spent, or 2 hours, whatever it was spent at the tape ops, setting up the desk and setting up the tape machine to just so you could change from one song to another song, you know.
You're saying there about different styles and figures of the month. What's your opinion on the loudest word with compression?
Well, that's quite obviously everybody at first when you could buy little programs for your PC that made things sound louder, you thought, oh wow, this is fantastic. But you suddenly realise, you know, my opinion on it is leave the dynamics in, obviously, because if you overcompress stuff, eventually your ear just tunes it out, so it doesn't actually sound louder at all. It all just sounds the same, and it's the peaks that actually give you the real perceived loudness. It's not the constant barrage of 0 VU dB, you know, constantly banging at you as loud as possible, like everything louder than everything else. It doesn't work, you know. You really have to have the peaks and the dynamic range. That's what really makes things sound big and loud, you know? So my opinion is keep the dynamics there and don't overcompress. You know? In the 80s, I used to go across to London quite a lot to work, you know, when it's now called mastering, it was called cutting back then, because you're actually cutting vinyl. Basically, you walked in and they would say, well, what do you want, loud and bright, you know, and you would go, I don't know, you know, but that they were kind of geared up just to make everything sound loud on the radio, and everything went through broadcast limiters and cranked it up, and sort of like for that whole decade, just everything was just like zzz. And then when CD came out, so what they wanted the CDs to do was sound louder than the vinyl. So one of the tricks they did as well was when they brought out hi-fis with built-in CD players in the vinyl, the CD section was 4 dBs louder than the vinyl section to make you think it was better, because people would perceive louder as better at first, and now they've kind of gone off all that, and it's gone the other way around, you know. And all the conversion rates and all were far too low at first with digital and stuff. Everything just sounded crap. I mean, it really was bad until the 90s. For the first 10 years, digital was pretty iffy. You know?
I just open it up a bit, like, you know, because I know some people have been in studios and stuff and done bits and pieces, have been trying to realise they're, you know, does anyone want to come in and, you know, talk about difficulties they had, or good experiences or bad experiences in the studio?
Who's been in the studio with a band?
Me, Jerry, together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've been in the studio as well, haven't you, like composing
Yeah.
and performing?
What did you use, like instrument-wise?
Guitars and guitars and vocals, you know.
Aye. So it was basically songwriting and stuff?
Yeah.
Aye. And you were doing demos, or you were doing record?
Doing demos, yeah.
And did you have a band?
No, I mean, I wish I had it. You were saying earlier on about getting people to help you. I mean, I'd love to have done some.
Yeah.
I also had to spend hours and hours and hours. I've never had a bass guitar, you know.
Doing stuff yourself?
Just getting the technique with the 2 fingers in the bass and stuff.
Yeah.
Weeks and weeks. And
it wouldn't have been just easier just to go along to somebody and say, well,
be great.
do you want to get into this and help me out?
But I had no money, you see, I had no money to pay people, so.
Well, maybe that's a symptom of today's society, that everybody has to be paid for everything they do. You know, it used to be kind of different thing when bands were mates, you know, and somebody from one band would play in another band on a recording, and there would be no money discussed. But
It's like Jimmy Page playing tambourine.
yeah, that kind of thing. More cowbell.
But you do use drum programs and stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, but even
Yeah.
the drum programs, as we found, Paul, were an absolute nightmare.
Which was really using.
I don't know, I can't even
You
remember.
were using, I think, the guy I know was using Superior Drummer, I think, or BFD, one of those ones.
Well, again, like the roads, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, we
was
would
he
use
using
BFD.
They're pretty good.
Which version?
I don't know, he was
Because
doing.
BFD2 is stunning, like.
Yeah, well, we were
It's-
using the original one. But we found there was difficulty with getting the feel, getting a live feel.
What I find with them, I pretty much would normally use them with a Roland V drum kit, and the difference between the pre-recorded loops and stuff like that, and what you can get when you actually get a bespoke drummer to play for a specific song is night and day, because you actually do get a lot more feel. For a while, I used to use a live hi-hat as well, because I wasn't quite getting the sensitivity right. But if you take, I eventually took about 2 or 3 days with a set of E drums and Superior Drummer and got it completely nailed to get the sensitivities. And it is per drummer. You know, you really very much can't just kind of go preset, sit down and play it and expect it to sound good. You have to put a bit of work in, you know.
Down to velocity sensitivity.
Very much, and what curves you're using and stuff like that. So I did a lot of work on those kind of things to get a sound I'm happy with. But now I can pretty much get an identical live sound from a real kit and from Superior, because I take it right back to the raw drum level and process it through analog channels then.
Right.
So I'm not taking the kit out of the box. You know, I'm not just taking Superior Drummer as left and right what they give you.
So you're sending maybe say over 8 channels,
Yeah.
send it out through desk and then process external.
That's exactly. I split it out over 8 channels. I do kick, snare, stereo toms, and overheads.
Right.
And what about
The rest.
capturing that performance mode? I mean, how do you get an artist into the zone where you're getting like obviously there's a limited budget. They've got to get it down. They've got to get it as good as they can. And there's a lot of great stories over the years about how different producers got performances out of different artists. Like what is that about? What is the skill about?
I think the skill is to try to make people feel comfortable in an environment that they don't like, because people don't like studios. I don't like studios, and most bands don't like studios either, because they've been made to do something that doesn't feel natural to them. So I've kind of moved away. Sounds a bit strange coming from me, because I worked in studios for like 30 odd years now, you know, to say I don't really like studios, but I much prefer now to go to where the music is, take my mobile, set up, take it there, catch the music in the environment where it's normally being made. Not make people sit and wear headphones. As soon as you give people headphones, they're kind of going to go, can I have a wee bit more of him? Can I have a wee bit more of him? And it turns into a logistic nightmare of getting everybody's headphones right. And the best thing, exactly, you end up, the whole thing's like a 7-way monitor mix or something like this, which we had in Homestead. We had I think we had 8 channels of monitor mix going, you know, for various things, which got ridiculous. Whereas if you look at a program like Jules Holland, the bands just stand up there and play, and the sound isn't that far removed from what you would get in a studio. They just use wedges or whatever as if they were doing a live gig. So you kind of can tailor the recording if you use mics properly and you use polar patterns properly and stuff like that there, and get it set up, and kind of love the spill and don't try to make everything individually accurately recorded so you've got total control over everything and use artificial reverb. And like, for example, you could set up a band in this room and catch it fairly well with a stereo mic, whereas you could also go around and put individual mics on every musician.
So John Bonham only ever used 3 mics.
Well,
Always put in a separate room.
There's a lot of deck of trees stuff done with Zeppelin, you know, with the Johns boys, you know, that was all done just to catch, you know, the basic sound of the energy of the instruments in the room, you know. Because it's not important to get, you know, accurate recordings, it's important to get an accurate recording of the performance. You know, accurate recordings of each little tiny bit of it aren't as important as that. The whole thing's to catch the groove, and catch the mood, and catch the energy, or whatever it is you're trying to catch, you know? So,
So how do you find your time in the studio?
Well, the drum, where did you make the drums up? There's loads of mix, wasn't there?
Close mic'd overheads, but it was a small room, it was only 16 square metre room, so like there wasn't really a lot of space for sound to actually move, so you basically having to then take the close attack and play with it, you know, get a hot signal off it, and then try to it then comes down to the individual tuning. Tuning becomes a lot more important than, you know, because that's where your sound's going to come from. But the thing about it is, the more mics you use, the more phasing issues you're going to have, the more complicated that it becomes. You know, less is more.
Yeah, more mics, more problems. Definitely, you're right there. You know,
Because you're going to end up with colour pattern problems. You're going to cross.
See, as a performer, Fergal, how did you find it as a performer?
In the studio,
Aye.
I haven't really hit my groove in the studio ever yet. Like, I don't think I've been in them sort of in and out of them. Like.
what did you not like about it?
Just
Did
stand
you
with
use
your
the click
headphones
track
on
more
and
than
everything
headphones?
by yourself with click track going, and it's just you don't really get that.
You don't really get the autonomy problems in the studio.
Man, you know.
Number one, headphones. Number two, click track.
Drummers don't like
And nobody likes it. They're not part of the music, you know, and you feel as if you're boxed off. You don't feel normal in that environment. So my whole kick these days is to try to do away with all that and let the music find its natural tempo and speed. Because with all this technology that we're using now, you can create your own click tracks very easily in programs like Pro Tools. Then at that point, you can then add all your electronica or whatever you want to do using that basic template, which is actually a human feel, as it's called. You know, it's actually mistakes that make it sound good, but it's called human feel. You know, in the book. You know, but I think if people get away, as soon as you start to concentrate on a click, where you're sitting, where the concentration on the click becomes more important than the song, you lose the essence of the song.
The thing about it is, it's like, and from my own personal experiences with playing metal, see, unless you're absolutely rigidly tight, it doesn't work.
Oh, it has to be
You know what I mean?
tight.
So it has to be clicked. You know, but
But it doesn't have to be clicked.
How did you find using a click, Anthony, whenever
I couldn't stand
you couldn't stand it?
it. Even using the programs with the drums are spot on the beat, I couldn't stand that either. So the drummer I ended up using the last year was real loose. I mean, he went out at 10 and then made it up at the end of the next bar. So you have that swing, put it in the push figure, which was much, it's 100% difference. So the click tracks and even the rigid on the beat, perfect drum track.
Exactly. Well, you said that it has to be a click. Why didn't you
No,
make your own click?
no, I'm not saying that there has to be a click, but you know, it has to be, like, say for example, I used to play a lot of metal, and it has to be surgically precise to be what it is.
Yeah.
And the best way for a drummer to do that, to be surgically precise, is to be precise to a machine. Click, click, click. Does you nothing? But
I know.
yeah, but the thing about it is, another part of that precision is actually about your dynamic and your velocities. Rather than, you know, and that's what the human feel comes
Exactly.
into it. It's about, you're never going to have the same direct velocity, even if your stick's going the same distance.
You're bang on there, because I've found in my experience that the dynamic is much more important than the tempo.
Yeah.
Actually, the tempo looks after itself if it's done to a click, but the dynamic will give it the realness.
Like
more
if
than-
it says the triple feel, it's your first strike, your dynamic.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And it's that gives it its swing rather than actual tempo.
That's right, yeah. But I think you probably could look into it a little bit deeper about what you can do to sort that tempo map out from a real performance, because you do away with that whole inhibition there is with people not wanting to hear clicks and not wanting to hear, feel closed in with headphones and stuff. Do the performance and then use the technology to manufacture the click. And if it wavers a little bit, you can fix all that.
Oh yeah. Well, see, one thing.
How do you know, Mudd? How do you know when you've got it? How do you know when
You listen.
yeah?
You'll know when you've got it.
How can you? I mean, I know that, you know, even in terms of doing takes. How do you know that takes the one? When?
That's right.
But I mean, that's very vague, like, you know. To say
No, I know that, but that's like kind of saying, you know, you're looking at two
Like, what do you-
photographs, you know.
So what are you bringing to bear there? Like what is it that's making the difference?
Well, it's like you play it back and instinctively you think, right, that's it.
Because I've heard stuff that you've done where, like, when you've done it, you can hear how it would sound. Like, say you're putting it through, you're going to put it to a pre, but you know what it's going to sound like at the end of that process, and it's hard to tell sometimes.
Where it's going.
You know, it's like a rough diamond rather than a polished one, and then
Yeah, but I mean, at the end,
you would polish it up then afterwards.
yeah, but I also try to get the original take as best as possible, because you know the better it is at that stage. Obviously, it's going to get better the more you do to it. You know, but I mean, you've got to get the original take feeling good. And I've had bands who walk into the studio, just set up and perform live, and just can't wait to get the tape going to catch it because I know they're on. And then 6 hours later, doing the same song, they're not going to be on.
Yeah.
You know, because you've spent the whole time getting the bass player's headphones right. You know, you need to be able to get in there and grab it when they're happening, and you'll know. Yeah, I know you say it's being vague to say it's about your feeling. You'll know when you've got one. It just goes boom, bang, that's it, yes, lunch, you know.
Yeah.
You really can tell that easily, you know. And well, or maybe that's something, you know, you have
Do you
to
think
learn
that
over the years.
But
or whatever.
is the performer conscious of that?
Oh, everybody knows.
Well,
Everybody
it's
knows.
the classic story that whenever Guns N' Roses were recording Appetite for Destruction, it took 3 weeks over recording Mr. Brownstone and recorded Sweet Child of Mine in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It was just like, that's it.
Boom, you know.
Bang.
You go boom, hit, don't you?
But Mr. Brownstone's one of the best songs in the album, but it took him 2 weeks to actually physically record it.
Did you find that you knew that at the start of your career, or did it develop as your career went on? You were able to call the shots that you were
Well,
find one that was exactly it.
I'm not sure. Like, I kind of always thought I knew, you know, but I became aware of being right about it afterwards, probably through feedback and things coming back and being more or less successful or whatever. You know, I kind of go, oh, I was right about that one. So I'll apply those criteria, you know, the next time I'm doing
Was that
something.
feedback from record labels or peers or?
Everything, you know, just in general, you know. Just even just somebody saying, "Oh, I really like that," you know, and you kind of go, "Oh, what do you like about it?" "Oh, I really like just the whole vibe of it." And then you think back, "Oh, what was it caused that?" And then you go, "Oh, we didn't use a click," and you go, "Ah, right." So I'll try next time I have those guys in. We'll not bother with a click, you know, and you got it, you know.
I can choose your feedback from the record label and the city.
Oh, I know. Well, sometimes the record label is a real difficult one, you know, but I've had quite a few Barney's those over the years.
And what about instruments then? Like, you know, the quality of instruments. You know, is there, you know, because you hear a lot about like lo-fi and stuff, and then you realise that, like, you know, people who claim that they're, you know, using very cheap things then turn around and they're using other things as well, like, you know. And then you've also got people like Keith Richards who would have deliberately sought a cheaper sound in order to make it sound a certain way.
You know what I mean? You always got, I mean, I remember the first Green Day album and they talked about all this, you know, like garagey and stuff, it sounded, it was still costing $2,000 a day to record it for 6 months, you know, to make it sound bad. Neil Young used to just do that without trying, you know.
Yeah, sure. It was the, what do you call them? The Kinks.
Yeah.
He used to just slash the codes.
Yeah.
He's
I heard that, yeah, just to get the distortion, yeah, stick a knife in the
turn it up, slash the codes.
There was an awful lot more experimentation went on to get sounds back in the day than there is now. It kind of tends to be now. One of the big disadvantages, I think, of things like Pro Tools and stuff, or Amp Farm, or any of those programs, is you are thrown up with a list of presets, and people do tend to click on them and go, "Oh, that'll do," you know. Whereas you were made to work a bit harder in the old days, you know, to kind of do that. And in doing that, you became original, because no matter what way you did it, it was always slightly differently from the last time you did it. And I would encourage you all to try to get back to first principles about doing stuff and find out, you know, how it was done before you could get it out of a box by pushing a button.
Do you find that there's a tendency for people to think that because, Tony Allen used a 4x12, JCM 800 and an SG, that they go out and they buy a JCM 800 and a 4x12 and they expect the sound of Tony Allen.
Well, it won't. So there's always that.
I also have the thing that when we go in, it's like, I want to sound like Tony Allen. That's why I've got this gear, make me sound like Tony Allen.
But you could have Sabbath gear sitting on stage ready to run for a gig, and the night before, if you left it over till the next day and they were rocking out at the end of the gig and it sounded absolutely fantastic, then you took the 4 wee lads in, just don't touch anything, just get up, plug it in and play it. Yeah, it's not all about the gear and how much technology is used. You can or can't polish a turd depending on how good you are, and you basically just can't expect it without the input. The source has to be right, whether it's the player or the instrument or the environment or the room or whatever it is, or the conditions of the recording, or whether you're getting on well with the producer or getting on well with the engineer. All that has to be right before, as a given, before you apply any technology to it at all. Well, there has to be a good atmosphere to get a good recording,
And a good song.
And a good song, yeah, exactly. It's the nuts and bolts have to be right. No matter how much you work at it, it'll never get any better.
I mean, it seems to me there's quite a big disparity, especially these days. I think we discussed it before about how tracks, I think some of you have frustrations these ways as well, where tracks that you start end up being done again and again and again and like added to, and suddenly like they're taking like months and years to complete these things, whereas when you read about the Beatles going in, recording something, and then it's out within a couple of weeks, and there's, and even the punky thoughts of like the undertones when they record and then the single's out and it's gone and they're working on the next one, whereas there's these other tracks, and I think my experience is that a lot of people find with the digital stuff you do end up in this process where it goes on. And
yeah, well, there's one particular project I can think of that I worked on, and basically by the time that we'd gone through, the actual initial recording sounded better than the output that they wanted, and they just went, can you polish this, can you polish that, can you polish? I said, guys, you're polishing nuts right out of this.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, I want more bass, and I says, you want bass on the cleaner recordings.
You see, one of the disadvantages of the original reason for digital when it came out was, first of all, it was that there was less noise on the recordings, and they brought out digital recordings to get rid of the noisy recordings. But the real reason for it was because it was cheap. I mean, it cost you a fortune to record the old way, whereas now you can basically go in and buy a toy that costs you about 50 quid and make nearly as good a sound record as you could 20 years ago with 100,000 quid's worth of equipment. Now, the problem is with digital being cheap and you can do that at home, it's basically free, and you've lost the adrenaline and the pressure to do things under pressure. In other words, red light's on, that's cost me money, better get it down, go for it, a bit of adrenaline, and the performance level goes right up through the roof. Whereas if you go, I can always drop it in, or I'm going to go down the pub for a while instead, or I'm going to watch TV and stuff I'm doing at home, That's the disadvantage of home recording. The advantage is the same thing, it's cheap, and you can formulate all the ideas and do the pre-production without sitting lining some studio's pockets, basically because you haven't done your homework properly. But that's your fault, that's not the studio's fault. A proper studio will be able to catch you just as quickly in 3 hours as they can in 3 months. As we did in the Made of Ale sessions. We basically went in there at 9 o'clock, and by 12 we had to have a result. Well, actually by 1 o'clock, we went in at 9 o'clock and we spent the first half hour lined up with the tape machine and then had a cup of coffee, and then you got the band in. They had to play live. You were allowed one overdub which is basically your lead vocal or your backing vocals, and then
So for the field sessions.
and then just basically at the end of the day, you just had to do a quick mix within about the last half hour of the session, and it was just basically faders up where they were. So you got it right at source. There's none of this kind of making decisions afterwards. Or we'll replace the kick drum and we'll replace the snare drum and let's add another guitar there. If you could catch it live, you know, as far as they were concerned, you weren't any good, you know. And then they used to swap tapes out with the producers. I mean, I worked in Maida when Queen did Bohemian Rhapsody, and I remember Roy Thomas Baker coming in to the studio, and the producer of the radio show going out and having lunch with him. They swapped over the tapes because basically the Musicians Union said Queen had to do a backing track to be able to perform it live on Top of the Pops. So officially, the tape that they were given was supposed to be the backing track that they didn't make available. Nowhere near it. You know? So basically, there's a lot of pressure, time pressure to get things done in that 3 hour slot. And the old classic recordings were all done in 3 hour sessions. The Beatles have broken the mold there because they made so much money. They were allowed to go in at 5 o'clock at night and work till 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, and the biggest complaint was we had to pay a night watchman extra money for being around and make sure the heat was on for you.
Did the Beatles still keep that mentality of the pressure, the momentum of their working?
Well, the Beatles kind of were old school in that way because they basically were brought up knowing nothing else, but they took a bit of artistic license and got egos and stuff like that.
It took them a bit of time to develop that though.
Yeah,
But they also,
but they still all played right up till the very end. They still went in as a 4-piece on most of the stuff and played as a band,
Yeah.
and then everything was overdubbed. But they would do 20, 30 takes just to get bass, 2 guitars, bass and drums, you know, and the vocals.
They also had that tempo factor, George Martin.
Well, that's it.
You know.
The temporary member, you know, or the on-off member, you know, and so that helped a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Get your band together, and you know you're looking to put it together. And you want something that you want to release. I mean, these days, like, you know, releasing isn't the problem that it was. I mean, you can throw anything up there, but there is a question of quality, isn't there?
Yeah.
So how do you get on that process so that what you're getting and what you're releasing? Because I notice myself that there's a lot of material out there, but there's a lot of fairly bad material out there that you've got to wait.
I think we're just starting to come out of the first flush of, you know, we've had all the MySpace and, you know, and all this stuff where everybody can record it at home and stick it up there and, oh, look at me, I've got a record on MySpace, or I've got this, and I launch my new record and we'll have a big party in the Empire, you know, and then we'll all go to yours, and then we'll have yours and Auntie Annie's next week, we'll all go to that, you know, and it's all a bit of kind of, a little bit trying to create an industry out of nothing, because none of it actually means anything. It's all just going around in circles, and it's got to the stage where there's whatever it is, how many million, you know, songs up on MySpace, and you don't know where to look to find the good ones. But every now and again you hear something that's obviously got a bit of quality, and they're the ones that are standing out now, because there's just so many million crappy YouTube and MySpace songs that people have just stuck a mic up in a camera and, you know, performed a whole band into this thing. It costs like throws, you know? And just I think the quality is going to start to win out again. You know?
So, you know, I mean, you talked a lot about, mentioned like pre-production. You know, just for those that are sort of maybe not aware, what is pre-production? What is the preparation process? What should you be doing in terms of pre-production?
Okay, well, I mean, you'll find it's like basically getting rid of all the problems that you would find in the studio before you get there. So what you usually do is, I used to find it was nearly always that the band, when they've been rehearsing, hadn't heard each other. It was all loud and it all sounded great and there was loads of energy. They hadn't actually listened to the elements of what was going on. And unfortunately, you do have to break it down a bit. Once you've learned it and done that and sorted that out, you can get the energy back in again by playing it properly, as opposed to just anyway. Even things like, it used to be at one stage, I remember in the 70s, the kick drum always had to have a bass guitar note on it and stuff like this, and it was ultra tight and all this kind of thing. Then you discovered, like in certain forms of dance music, you've got a kick going dum 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 dum, the bass goes dum, 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 and pumps against it and stuff like that. So it's complete opposite to that. There's still a pulse, and it's important to realise that it doesn't have to be clinically accurate, but you do have to occasionally listen to each other and kind of be aware. The drummer has to be aware of what the bass player is doing, so either a compliment without exactly necessarily doing exactly the same, and the same with all the other instruments.
I can think of another band that I've recorded with that as soon as the first bass takes were done, the second, because there wasn't one note played right.
Yeah, I know.
But it sounded absolutely mighty live, and it sounded mighty, but not one note of it was right, not one note of it was on.
Yeah,
And they just went, you're right.
I used to have bands that just come to me to do a record maybe once a year with a new bass player every year, you know, because the bass player was always the one that got dumped. You know?
What about things like, tempos and keys and stuff? Should that be sorted out in pre-production? Should that?
It's usually a good idea because a lot of the time you might find you're doing the song in the wrong key for the instruments or for the voices, you know. I mean, a lot of times you could be doing a song in G and it would sound much better in A. Just even for the brightness of it, so things sound different in different keys. It's not just a matter of let's say you're playing in G and you put on a capo and then play same chord shapes, only you're doing it in A. Not only have you changed the key, actually the whole brightness of the song will have changed. It won't sound the same in A as it does in G. The voices might be better. Sometimes a voice just at its limit sounds better and with more energy than it does if it's just, more
In a
comfortable.
comfortable
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Do you have any favourites?
But I mean, there's all that's the sort of stuff that goes on in pre-production. But it's a good idea to involve the producer or the engineer at that point, rather than just turn up on the day and expect to get a result in the studio. Sometimes it's courteous on both sides to kind of say, would you like to come along and listen to our gig, or I would like to go along and see your gig to see what you're about. Otherwise, you end up sounding like the last band that was in the studio because the producer or engineer hasn't even heard or is aware of what you're doing, you know. And it's good to find that out and get those things ironed out. Then there's the usual, turn up with your guitarist tuned to a set of spare strings and drum heads and all that kind of stuff, that people kind of forget about. But pre-production's usually, what I usually do is I have a meeting with a band. I said, right, play me all your stuff, and I kind of narrow it down to what I like, what songs I like. And then I said, well, which ones did you want to record? And I see which ones tally up. And if we get 3 or 4 songs out of all of that we agree on, kind of job's done. But then they'll say, oh, I really like that song. Oh, we've been doing that for years. We want to do this new one. The new one isn't always the best, and they kind of think, oh, because they've been playing it for 2 years or 3 years, it's old hat. But the rest of the world hasn't heard it. That's a new song to them. It might be a better song. You might be fed up with it, but I mean, your latest material isn't necessarily your best. And you can rework old material maybe as well to make it sound, more now or more appealing or whatever. So pre-production's that as well. Actually, decide A&R was artists and repertoire. It was basically picking the artists and picking the songs that went with the artists. So that's what the old A&R definition was. So that's an important part of the production process.
What about A&R now? What dealings would you have had with A&R? Would come over to oversee the record company's interests? That you're going to sound like what the kind of band they signed?
A&R is more of a scouting for the actual artists now than it used to be, because it used to be the record company would sign the artist, and then the A&R guy would go and look for songs for them. Mm-hmm. And they would go to different publishers and find out, well, what songs have you got that would suit this artist? And the right person in the publishing company would liaise with the A&R person to get the right songs for the artist, and the artist would record them. But that was way pre people writing their own songs in bands, which didn't happen.
So what do they do now?
Well, now you see the roles are all being kind of redefined, and that everybody does everything. I mean, the producer engineers and maybe even writes the song and performs the instruments as well, which is why I think it's maybe lost a little bit of the kind of ambience of having 5 people in a room playing together, bouncing off each other and getting that whole groove and vibe. when it's done with one person sitting one-on-one with a computer, or even one person working with an engineer, you don't get the same input.
Would you say would that apply the same way to like dance and house music? Do you think it's better to widen that circle?
I think even with dance music, two heads are better than one, or three heads even, but two probably would be enough for most of it. For most music, two people's enough. That two musically and maybe an engineer. But I don't think it's a good idea to be sitting working all the time on your own material. Unless you're just doing technical stuff. When you're actually tracking and stuff like that, I think it's important to have a bunch of people, because that's where the energy bounces off each other and you get the level of recording up.
Like your pre-production on there?
Sorry?
Your pre-production, do I know anything to it on?
Yeah. Pre-production would involve. Another thing about pre-production is deciding who in the band you think are going to contribute most to the recording as well. So you can kind of go along and say, well, obviously he knows what he's at, and he knows what he's at. So we're going to have to nurse these other guys through it a little bit, and you would maybe kind of use the guys who kind of knew what they were doing to interface with the other guys, and the whole setup as well, So basically, you communicate with the lesser players or whatever it was in the band, and it's important to do all that rather than find out an R&D session with people you've never met. Oh dear, this is going to be a bollocks. This is going to be a bit of a disaster here. So it's always good to iron a bit of that out first.
And what about then using session players? How does that work?
Well, that's a hard one to sell to people. No, number one, you've got to convince the artist or the band that there's something that can add to their recording that they can't provide from within their own ranks. Because sometimes it's better if you're to suggest, let's say the band doesn't have a guitar player, like King or some of these guys, it'd be nice with a guitar in there. And well, none of us plays guitar. Well, what do you suggest? I said, well, here's a guy here who could sit pretty well in here, And they'll go, oh, I don't like that idea, And I said, well, why don't you like it? Well, we kind of like to do it ourselves. And I said, well, you've got to decide what's best for the record. Is it an idea? And I go with them. Again, I'll always side with the band and say, if you don't want to do it, well, definitely not do it if you're absolutely sure. But if it enhances it and you agree that it's going to make a better record, why don't you widen the circle a little bit and bring a few people in and see what they have to say about it, and see, you try a couple of players and see what you can come up with. It is a difficult one to approach with some bands, because they don't really get it, They kind of think, well, it's a closed shop, this is our little gang, and nobody else gets in there to play. And then they probably, after time, you usually find that they're more open to it. At first, when they're a little bit less mature, they'll be very.
You'll find that whenever they first listen back to something, especially if they're going in, as you say, less mature, never in the studio before, listen back to their first recording, something missing there.
Yeah.
But they can't put their finger on it.
Yeah, and it's up to you. To kind of suggest what might fill that gap,
Yeah. But do you find would you advocate then the idea of better to be looking at it than looking for it?
Yeah, and you can always leave it out if it didn't work, and no harm. I would always go, why don't you try it? Put it in there. Well, the expense. It's an investment in maybe a better project. It's like a punt. You kind of go, right, that might work and it might not. Is it worth the gamble to find out if it is or not? Is it that important to you?
Yeah, and as a producer, would you have a network of people? Have you established a network of people who would be session players who would play in certain styles with different sort of, and they would be your.
Of course, I have.
Yeah.
The 18. Yeah.
So that would be that.
Everybody's got that.
That'd be something that you'd be bringing to the table as a producer if you were,
Well, that's one of your strengths. I mean, a lot of producers kind of use that. I mean, you've got somebody like T-Bone Burnett, who's a big kind of roots producer out in the States. and a lot of people will work with him because of who you can bring. You know, he'd just turn around and say, right, you need a harmony on there. Yeah, okay, well, what do you suggest? Oh, we'll get David Crosby or somebody to come in and do that. I go, what? No, he's just a guy on the phone, you know. You probably haven't heard of him, but he's like...
I called David Crosby, I'm not far off.
Well, I'm going to crack. but basically, that a producer can bring that. They can also bring more than that to it by kind of suggesting ways of recording that they've discovered in the past, and they can bring a style, you know, to a recording that the band wouldn't know how to achieve themselves. So you just get a lot of people going along and get somebody like Mitchell Froome, who did the recall guys from R.E.M. R.E.M. come up with this kind of loose kind of thing, and then all of a sudden, how do you do that? Well, that was Mitchell, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 Mitchell's a millionaire, you know, just because basically people didn't know how to get that sound, and they went to R.E.M. How did you get that sound? We don't know. He just did it, you know. Ask him, you know, and that's how a lot of producers get their name built up. It's just basically doing very basic things for a band who hadn't a clue, but the band attribute all that success or all how that sound was achieved to this guy who magically, you know, made them sound far better than what they felt they sounded before, you know. And all he's really done is just recorded them properly. You know, so it's not, there's not always some magic formula where you
But
go.
the producers now are seen almost in the same way as film directors are in some ways, aren't they? Like, I mean, people now know the names of producers. I mean, apart from George Martin and stuff, who is the first of those. But yeah, Butch Vig and they're celebrities and artists in their own right, aren't they?
But I remember you talking about Butch Vig and Steve Albini and people like that there, and I remember actually going and reading afterwards the setup they used to get a particular sound. And I went, God, I've been using that for years. You know, that's exactly, it was down to every mic on a drum kit and the same mic and the bass cab and stuff like that. And I went, well, hang on, why would they be using the same design without any, you know, kind of similar background or anything like that? And what I realised was it was old school broadcast recording of the kind you did in 3 hours in an old session. And that is still, right up until today, has managed to last all that time. And it's just basically good first principles recording. Finding out why you use that mic, you know, what happens if you move it 6 inches to the right or to the left, move it back, and stuff like that there, learning your microphone technique and not kind of going, well, we'll just get it down there and then we'll fix it all in the mix. If you know what you're after and you know, take that all into account when you're doing the original recording and use those basic first principles and know what they're about. Things like phase, you know, phase cancellation, just real obvious things like mic position, you know, speaker placement, just general stuff like that there. If you're on top of that there, you'll get better recordings from the word go. And that's why I kind of, the one thing I can thank the BBC for was the best training you can get in all that kind of stuff. I mean, they really make sure you know your onions. If you don't pass 60%, they'll throw you out, you know. That's the pass rate, never mind the do well rate, you know. And you have to be able to get in there with a bunch of mics and a wee mixer and catch a band or whatever it is and come out with a product in 3 hours. And that takes a lot of learning and a lot of experience to do, you know. It's good training.
You record therapy, did you?
Did I?
Did that record
I
live?
did 4 albums with him.
Was it live? David?
Pretty live. You mean live? Did they play live in the studio?
Oh, they recorded.
Yeah, we did. When with therapy, I used 2 guitar amps, SVT bass amp, and a drum kit. Just basically all playing live. And 5 drum kit tied together with string.
Did they come to you and instead of fingers doing, you know? Did it match instead of fingers?
Yeah, well, they were kind of locked between Stiff Little Fingers and Judas Priest. But they kind of took the stiff little finger sound and just preached riffs and married them together and became therapy. But I saw therapy live before I recorded them.
Do you remember them when they were evil priest?
Hmm?
Do you remember them when they were evil priest?
Evil priest, I
Evil
remember.
priest in Ireland, the gigs and all.
Yeah, but I remember therapy. I saw them in the limelight the first time I saw them on a Saturday afternoon, and I had a similar experience as to when I was 14. The first time I saw Rory Gallagher. How the hell does one guy make all that noise? And it was just like I was blown away by it. And I went, right. And my challenge, I said, I've got to capture that, all that noise, and get it in a wee DAT tape. How do you do that? You know? And I kind of worked out. I got lucky with it, you know. And a lot of it was experimenting. I mean, we basically.
How long did it take them to record Baby Teeth?
We did very quickly. We did the first EP over a weekend. The abstract and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll go with Baby Teeth.
Baby teeth. Probably overall about a week and a bit.
No,
First start to finish.
Yeah, same pleasure there as well, right? Because
Like, a lot of the track-
it was similar length and similar sound.
It was mixed in southern, but I didn't mix Pleasure Death.
Oh, did they? You just recorded it?
Recorded tracks for it, you know, and then the multi-tracks went off, got done in London.
Whereabouts?
Southern music.
We're going to have to wind this up here. That's hopefully, like, you know, you just got something out of that. That's like our sort of first session, looking at, like, you know, studios and using them. This afternoon it's a bit more sort of like, you know, playing back things, and, you know, there'll be less talking, you know, more involvement from yourselves, and, you know, play a few examples of things, and people can ask, like, well, how do you get that sound, and what if you're off that there, and, you know, you can relate directly to the music, like, hopefully a bit more. I mean, how do people feel? Is that all right, Dannan?
I can probably help you out quite a lot with just basic stuff like mic technique and things like that, where you kind of said, I've always tried to do it like this, and I'm never happy with the result I get. Well, what should I do instead? I've been around most of the corners to kind of find out, you know, where the problems are, so I could probably help out with that.
So if there's any particular things to do with, like, stuff you're working on yourselves, you want a bit of advice on, or you want to talk about, or, you know, we do that. I can get a YouTube set up as well, so, you know, if there's any particular pieces you want to reference, you know, we can fire them up as well, and we can talk about, you know, the popular culture ones as well.
Okay.
You know, if you want to talk about the Beach Boys or the Beatles or something like that, we can play the tracks back and do that this afternoon. We can talk about how they're put together too. Okay? So grab a bit of lunch and then.
Thanks
What
very
time
much.
are we in here again? Back at one?
Jokes.
Huh?
Who's Jokes?
Good.
Got text and stuff.
Stop there. I've got a radar, but they don't travel well. And there you can turn off one side, which you can't do in iTunes, can you? But you've got volume on one of your speakers or something like that. You can track just volume on that. And then the right hand side, what we put down was click track, the conductor, and piano chords. On that, they're all on that they're all swaps. Because there's some other
No, you take your overall mix. Take your full mix. Single start like that. The pre's, the text, we gotta be something. And you know, the front yeah, the text, it's a good one. You sort of put it on
and then draws the waveforms out. Doing the and mastered it in, and I can't remember all the things. So that's part about the volume as well. I didn't bring that much ice, it's only 3 string session in the middle of the day.
It's gonna look smoother. No, it takes an average of it takes an average of the main amplitude. Just huh?
Yeah. Tell me about it.
That's right.
Did you ever work with 7.3?
Got grandchildren now. So eventually got there. A long, terrible stretch. We're going to play some bits and pieces of tracks. You know that.
It's a guy, young guy called Mick Cassidy, and somebody else brought him along to me and said this guy's got quite an unusual voice, and he sings and plays acoustic guitar. Will you record him and just see what he wants to do with it? And he had some kind of management that was interested in doing a record with him. So he came in and he just play me your stuff. So he just sat down and I said, we need to get a bit of structure into this. So I just give him basically a beatbox and got the tempos worked out, got the keys worked out with him, that kind of pre-production thing we were talking about earlier. So this is a song he did called Swept Away. And so he just left them with me for maybe a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks. I just kind of had a rough idea where I was going to go with it, and I booked in guitar player, bass player, drummer, and keyboard player, and we kind of just ran the same songs in a band situation just to see how it would work out. I was just going to play you what it was like before and what it was like when we added some stuff in, just to give you an idea of what we do with it.
Yep, Swept Away.
He had a lot of things in his voice where he was kind of going falsetto and stuff, and I thought this guy could actually probably sing rock if he tried. So I tried to make him shout it instead of singing so nice.
Go like that.
That one called Swept Away or Swept?
That one's Swept Away.
Swept is the original. So this is what he played along with. It's kind of like light vocal, light acoustic guitar, called beatbox.
Got a head start feeling low, 20 days in my week.
You know, just hear the quick step.
Apologies wasted, make my eyes start to
maybe had on it, he was kind of thinking about
You
it.
seem to know me, but you
That kind of
hurt
thing.
me so.
Which
And
wasn't what I heard at all.
I'll try and talk, but you
Just listen to the
just tell
sections
me
of
no.
it. Version of
Thinking about outside, and I used to lie.
I could hear a wee bit of roughness in his voice, and I thought
Still want
if
you
there was
on
more of that in
my
there,
side,
I'd like to get a
never
bit more of it.
leave me
He starts to do this kind
behind. Well, I've been kept here for days.
Another section here, you know.
Swept away with the
kind of chorus here, you know.
waves to see us eye to the maze.
He was into all that, I thought that was a bit.
That's why I want you
Right,
to
right.
stay.
That full voice.
A bit nice, so I can't, well, I
think we would.
It was suited more like Aussie than.
So take a look at
Back
my
then,
shoes
Brady,
and say
yeah.
what you see.
that time he had no comprehension of where he wanted to go with it. I had never heard it, so it was just basically he came along and
Lost
played
feelings
me
leading
10 songs in the studio
to
all night.
my fate.
And that was just
I hope you feel that feeling once again. Thinking about our time and how you used to lie.
What I did with this was kind of went more kind of like a Zeppelin acoustic and some bouzouki and stuff like that there, kind of Zepp 3 kind of stuff, you know, and slightly bigger drums and stuff. And I did the overdubs in Homestead and I mixed it down in Windmill Lane. You have to reload that.
That seems to be one of the whole reason.
Got a head start feeling low with rainy days in my week. Apologies wasted make my eyes start to leak. You seem to know me, but you've hurt me so. And I'll try and talk, but you just tell me no. So take a look at my shoes and say what you see. Faded, suede, it's worn out, just like me. Lost feelings leading slowly to my pain. I hope you feel them failing once again. Thinking about our time, I used to still want you on my side, so just leave me behind,
Two people, me and Tommy Miles.
How many nights do you get on the drum?
It's 3 toms, kick drum, snare drum, 2 overheads, 2 ambient.
So, get it?
Tom kit. Was it Tom?
Who's the best?
That was recorded through an AMAC Galileo. Which is quite nice. That's what I used to have.
Voice completely changed, I don't know. Voice was completely different. Voice was completely different.
His voice, yeah, that's what I was kind of. I kind of realised the guy's probably actually a rock artist and not what he thought he was.
I prefer John voice.
A lot of people do like it, you know, but it's just to show you where you can kind of go with the structure of the song.
Reverb saturated.
Yeah, well, that's got a big 960 on it and stuff like that. That's fine.
I prefer the first vocal.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I say, you know, it's probably the first vocal wouldn't have sold for him, but you know, that was more where the management saw it going. You know.
But I like what you've done with it. I like that it's that taking the heavy rock back into it.
Well, that's the idea. So it's just like it tanks on through and it just builds up and gets noisier and rockier. But it's to show you like basically where you can go. Not only Well, with the voice and stuff, and like the wee middle eights and stuff like that, there, so we kind of pick it off into sections and give it little themes as well that aren't necessarily to do with what the original thing was, like just voice and guitar. The guitar thing, which almost gives it another kind of hook, and you kind of build the hooks as you go through it. A wee trick for how to put things together, you know. So you go.
Finish up, man.
Yeah, it's nothing. You don't have to like this stuff. It's just to illustrate the point, you know.
Good voice. How you voice it?
But that's pretty much that's all real kit and real bass, real guitars and stuff.
Snare sounded great, so that snare drum.
Yeah, but it's all real. Try airbags. The one that doesn't say Hollywood on the end of it. This is the kind of thing I got asked to do. A friend of mine is a guy called Peter Ellinger out in Los Angeles, and he asked me to let me hear some Irish stuff. And I sent it out to him, and he said that would be great with an orchestra. I was doing this album at the time, and I said to the guys, "Do you fancy putting strings in this?" So we did. So this is what we This is what we went out to the string session with. So this is just basically one accordion, and this was actually recorded without a click. So the strings were added to this in real time as well.
Try to make a recording the other night.
Well, this has got all the rattles and bangs in there as well, you know. It's quite hard to make because you've got making a small accordion like that there. If you want to get both sides, you get two sound sources, and you've got the old phase problem where the mics cancelling each other out. So there's a couple of ways of doing it, you know, to get like stereo on it, or even to get mono on it with both sides. But you have to phase reverse one of the mics. Have you ever seen that done? You know, where you have two mics that are cancelling each other out because they're pointing basically at each other.
You're getting your mixed pairs.
For example, if you wanted to record a snare drum and you wanted to mic the top of the snare drum, but you weren't getting enough of the sound of the snares, you could put another mic underneath the snare drum. But the trouble is, those two mics would be cancelling each other out because there would be 180 degrees out of phase with each other because they're pointing at each other. So what you basically do is on your desk, phase reverse one of the mics so that it's actually sounds as if it's pointing that way, but it's actually pointing that way, and then you can add the sounds without it all going skinny and cancelling each other out. So it's kind of useful technique if you're recording something like an accordion or something like that there.
Some microphones have phase switch built in.
On the desk more like you're very early on. Sometimes on preamp, you wouldn't really get it on the mic. A figure eight, mate, if you ever seen figure eight patterns, is exactly the front and the back are 180 degrees out of phase with each other anyway. So they basically, and they're very good for getting rejection on the other two sides of the mic. So you basically get a signal coming from here and a signal coming from here. It's good for you to get two vocalists that are singing together. You put a figure of eight mic in the middle and it'll pick them up evenly. And if you've got you don't want to pick up any other instruments at the other sides, you can have the instruments here and instruments here. You can have a drum kit here and maybe the singer's moved off a bit either side of it, and it'll not pick up much on the sides that aren't on the figure of eight, aren't part of the two lobes of the figure of eight. So it's a good way to reject sound is to use a figure of eight. It's got one of the best rejection characteristics of any microphone. Whereas if you use the cardioid, it'll be a narrower pickup, but it'll still have a bit around the back where it'll be picking up some extraneous sound from other sources. You know, so that's one of the good uses of polar diagrams and mics. But I'll tell you about that another time maybe. But it's very good for recording. For example, if you're recording, one of the hardest things to get a sound on is acoustic guitar and voice, because you get loads of the voice in the acoustic guitar and loads of the acoustic guitar and the voice. Whereas if you use two figure eights, so you've basically got a figure eight sitting pointing at your guitar, and the sides of the figure eight that haven't got the lobes. In other words, you're getting loads of the room from back there, no problem if it's a good room. You're getting loads of the guitar on the front end, but this bit here you're getting practically zero because that's the best rejection you're going to get. That part of the figure of it. Can I draw it out?
Yeah. Keep that drawing. Flick it around just to leave that. But he's all finished. That's extra ready. So.
I don't need much. Just
He wants to keep this one, so he does.
Okay. Right, you've got your figure of 8 here. You see that there's your mic in the middle. There's the front and back. So basically, you're picking up. There's your guitar, or whatever it is, your source here, your voice. Okay. So if you get the singer here, you'll be picking up loads of the voice on this side and loads of the room from here. But at this point here, and at this point here, you're getting practically nothing. You see that?
Draw it bigger in the middle.
Oh wow.
Not
Okay.
Paris.
Right, you've got your singer here, right? Then you've got your mic. Your mic stays here in front of the singer. Okay. This is a figure of 8 mic, so you've got basically. You've got loads of pickup coming from the singer, and you've got an equal amount of pickup coming from the room. But these are two completely out of phase signals, but they are both feeding into each other. So you're getting, if you get a nice room, it's good because you're getting the acoustics of the room. You're also getting the voice, and because it's figure of 8, you don't have as much cardioid tip up on the bass, so you can go a wee bit closer to the mic without it going boomy, And then, so you get your singer here, your room sound coming from here, but on these two parts of the mic here, which are the sides that aren't the front or the back, the bits at the side, you can have a guitar player sitting playing along with this guy sitting here, and you're going to get hardly any of this guy on here because he's angled here. So if you've got a singer who's playing guitar, say he's sitting here playing the guitar, you put a figure 8 on here so that the rejection side is pointing at the guitar. So you're not getting any guitar coming into the vocal mic, but you're getting loads of vocal coming into the front side of the figure of 8 and loads of room from the vocal reflecting around the walls coming on there. You're basically getting rejection of the guitar. Same thing with the guitar. Put it down here and angle the figure of 8, highest rejection side to the vocal. So you can pretty much have a voice and a guitar going at the same time, and there's almost zero crosstalk between them. And that's just using, because most people just go cardioid on here, and forgetting about the fact that there's so much stuff going into a cardioid mic from either the voice into the guitar or the guitar into the voice that it's practically useless, to get rejection. Though sometimes it's just, if it sounds nice with 2 cardioids, it sounds nice, and you might not need that much rejection. But if you are having the problem, it's a good way to get rid of the problem, is to use 2 figure of 8s instead of the first choice, which would be, 2 cardioids. That's why when you buy all these new mics, the cheapest ones are the ones that are cardioid only. And if you want to get the next one up the range, is the one with the switchable patterns. That's because you can do stuff like this, and it's important to be able to, I think, to be able to use. For example, if you've got a drum kit and you've got a floor tom sitting here like this, and you've got a cymbal just above it, okay, and you want to make the floor tom, the thing to do is stick a figure of 8 pattern mic in here and angle that, do it at an angle so that angles toward the rejection side is towards the cymbal. So you're going to pick up more drum and less cymbal by using the figure of 8 mic than you would if you were just using a cardioid, and then because the cymbal will be going into the back side of the cardioid and quite a lot of it being picked up. So, hardly anybody uses those kind of mic techniques now, because they kind of just, you've got the 57 over the snare drum and the 421s over the toms, and they're all cardioid, and you're still getting lots of spill, but this is a much better way of getting good rejection, and good isolation between the drums. So,
What way do you record this on acoustic guitar?
on its own, I would usually use 2 mics. Probably small condenser mics, and I would experiment with the main mic, basically to find out where the boom point was, and avoid it. Angle slightly off the boom point, which is usually directly at the sound hole, and then experiment with the other mic up and down the neck, just to give it a wee bit of width and a wee bit of a light end, finger end of the guitar. So, but occasionally again, it's trial and error per the guitar.
So you're here, what way here?
Sorry?
Just do what way here, your way here?
Yeah, you kind of go by your starting point would be a couple of small body condenser mics. Or what I tend to do if I'm just using one mic, I would use an omni mic, because sometimes when you use a cardioid mic and get in too close, guitars sound boomy. Like if you're using a loud and acoustic and you record it with a cardioid in close, it'd just be boombox. It was boom, boom, boom. It took far too much bottom end. Whereas if you used an omni in exactly the same position, you wouldn't get anywhere near as much top or tip up of the low end. And with the omni, you also, if you have a nice room, catch up a bit of the wooden floor or wooden walls or something like that there, and it makes much nicer acoustic on it as well. So that's what I go for, acoustic guitar. The best way to do that is to go into the studio and demonstrate it. It's easy to talk about it, but it's when you actually hear it done, it sounds much better. So.
Back to Airbox was the first
This Airbox, this was just basically recorded with basically the accordion, and the reason I started all that there was because of the out of phase thing with the two mics. And the way to correct that is to bring it up to the mics up to 2 channels and then reverse the phase of one of them. You actually get little boxes, if it's not completely out of phase, they're about 300 quid, where you can dial the amount of out of phaseness back in, so you get a sweet point where the mics are reinforcing each other and there's no cancellation at all. But it's a lot of money to pay for a little box that does that, but it's very useful, Okay. Okay, well, if you remember a wee bit of the other one, it was just a single accordion, and this is just that. What we did was we went out to a sound scoring stage in Prague, and we used about 25, 26 players, and just basically recorded them live, and to show the difference between the players that you'll get around here and out there, where they do all the movie stuff out there. It's called the Prague Philharmonic. It's the name of the orchestra, and they do all the kind of Pirates of the Caribbean, the James Bond stuff, and all this kind of stuff. Basically, because they're as cheap as chips, they're only about €30 a session. Whereas over here, they're like €90 a session, or more. It was 90 quid now for a 3-hour session. You get over there, and you pay for an interpreter, and I just went out there with a conductor. And we just basically used the interpreter. I would get on the talkback. I'd be working with the engineer in the control room. Get on the talkback to the conductor, and the interpreter, while I spoke, it was like the United Nations. She spoke in English, or spoke in Czech, as I spoke in English to her, and started translating my instructions down to the orchestra.
A bit like Nicole Kidman, did she?
She looked like Nicole Kidman's grandfather. Days of Thunder. So this is these guys are hot. This is first take. So. We would have some part in this as well. Cellos and double basses. I kind of tried to match the reverb on the accordion on the mix, the reverb in there where we recorded the strings. It sounds as if they were playing together,
Sounds great.
The big room, it was a big score and stage, full size score stage. One take, one double bass here.
Had that Mustang.
There was that wee bit again there. He was a great player. Huge sound. Filled the room.
Had that moment. The voice actually was symphony.
These verses got horns. As well. This is just a raw session, you know, on the streets. But string sessions like that are few and far between. It's nice and just.
What mix did you use?
Oh, a load of stuff, and that was Neumanns everywhere. Vintage Neumanns too. So there was about there must have been about 20 vintage Neumanns in that room. We'd ever in spot mic as well. You know. 451s with CK9s over the top for the desks on the violins. C12A on the cellos. Or no, it's not C12A, it's C12s. And what else did I have?
Small temper.
Did you have a?
The C12A is basically the 414 replaced the C12, which is the big valve, you know, vocal mic that the AKG did, and they brought out the C12A, which replaced all that, and took the valve out and made it into a smaller package, which now looks like the 414, which is loads all around. But would have been normally used for cello and stuff.
Did you close mic for each string section or?
Each pair, each desk. So we basically had the 451s with CK9s over the top, and what's we have on? That was pretty much a whole bunch of those.
And the double bass, was it the case of
Double bass. Double bass was a C12 as well. All very nice.
Sounds good.
The studio used to be used during the Second World War as a dance hall for the Gestapo. So it was a real old building with big wooden doors, you know. When you went inside, there was a marble staircase and kind of metal handrails and stuff, you know, up there. When you went into the actual studio, it overlooked like a little garden where Einstein used to do lunchtime lectures for students when it was a college. You know, so historic spot, you know. And a picture of Bernstein up on the wall because he had recorded some of his stuff over there as well.
The composer, is the composer.
Historic spot.
You record the strings on Dannan?
We recorded. Sorry?
Dannan by Thurby, those strings on? Song Dannan, you did it?
What?
Thurby?
Oh, therapy? No. I never did strings with them. No.
You didn't know?
They had a cello player in the band. They had a cello player in the band at one point.
So you done a cover of a song Dannan, or was it really?
Oh yeah, okay. I know I did most of the stuff I did. All the recording on was the first two albums. Then we did pre-production on Nurse and Trouble Bump and Alice thing as well. So.
Next one.
Alright, what else we got there? Did we get the foreskin one?
Yes.
I don't think that's the one with the click there. By the looks of it.
Do you want to hear that one?
Well, I'll let you hear what we did here in this. The brief on this one was from the guy Peter Edinger. This is the one I played him. The actual the traditional tune. So if you play a bit of it. Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter that much, you know. But it's just basically when I took the music over to the guy who's the film guy over in America, said that would be great with an orchestra. So he wanted it to be a kind of American feel. He says you get a kind of like a New York, LA kind of city vibe to it. So what I did was I scored out some brass parts and some string parts and kind of threw that into the mix to see.
Copeland style?
I kind of Aaron Copland kind of stuff. He's an American composer, very much that kind of vibe with a bit of Starsky and Hutch thrown in. So
this one forced in shape, or
well, that's not the finish one. That's basically what they got. What I played to the string players in their fallback was just basically the click track, the piano chords for pitching on one side, and the accordion on the other side, just balanced up for what they wanted to hear. So, which is basically this. I think the other one I have there of that four spin is. It should be one that's just accordion on stages. Just a standard kind of Irish jig, you know, kind of 6/8, the A part and the B part, you know. What he wanted was something a bit funkier, you know, so just to record a wee tiny drum kit first. Yeah, the bass went on right near the end. I don't even know if the one I've got has a bass on it. I might not, you know. Just fiddle around with the chords a wee bit, just get a wee bit of. I kind of got this idea here. The band had that arrangement till there, and I did this bit here, you know, more of a kind of Steely Dan thing. At that point, there's a cut into a reel, so I'll let you hear what that's like with a wee bit of strings and brass and stuff. And it should be defined. What's it called? I think. What do you call it? It was one that says skin just.
skin jig.
Well, what happens then if you usually they replace click, you can replace click.
That's the one I showed.
So if you play it on it's what you said
Yeah. That's the problem I should have played you there now. So it's basically they had a mix in their class, so they could mix between the click and the piano chords, and the click was for tuning, and that was the actual tune just played, and that's what we took out to them just from the accordion. That's basically we added that in just to give them tuning information and timing information. Okay, do the finish one now.
Skin jig, maybe not. Yeah, probably on.
Not sure. Big reverb times in here. It's class.
You want to hear that? Maybe not bad.
What did you think? Drums like that recorded?
That doesn't look like it. It looks like it must be the one. Yeah, that's not. It's the remaining one. It's just called Skin.
We played that. We played foreskin probably.
I'm not sure what it is. So what I've got in here, I sold it. I think I have a part. see the basic section mic was an SM69, CK9s on 451 bodies. So basically just like a shotgun version of a 451 or about that one.
A big sound.
Yeah.
Did you mix it yourself as well,
Sorry?
Did you mix it?
Big sound, eh?
Mixed it. Yeah, you haven't given away anything else.
I've done some tips there as well. A lot of the strings are playing pizzicato there and then legato stuff.
To go on.
That's just a big gong, big tom, big tom.
How much was it again? The hire it was £40 for the.
That session cost about, wasn't bad, it was about €2,500
The whole session?
Yeah.
Hire studios, isn't it?
for the 4-hour session. It's very cheap out there. And there's a couple of bright sparks always that if you say something to the conductor, you change that beat a beat flat. There's some smart arse. If you hear what she's doing there, it's just kind of busting around the tune. What I did was I used the strings and the brass to echo what she did in the voice. So the voice went down first. But all those accents were in my head for hit points for the strings and brass later.
I'd just like to thank Mudd Wallace. Thanks everybody for coming along, and hopefully that was something that was useful for you. And,
So do we all get a good knockdown rate now with you?
Knock me down. I don't have a studio actually. I work out in my basement at home now, so and I work freelance.
You still up in Randallstown? You still up?
No, I sold Randallstown, so I did. So myself and the wife did, so. And I kind of have a basement studio, which is much nicer now because I don't really like studios, and I could go into a whole narration about why I don't like them and stuff. But I think they're like one you said before. The thing you get most is not yourself. You don't like headphones. You don't like click tracks. And the first thing you do when you go into a studio is you get a pair of headphones thrown on you, and this thing. So, hopefully, over the next couple of years, the results of that will bear fruit.
Excellent.
and as you say, putting your own stuff together,
I'd be interested to hear this Beatles project, or Beatles track that you all work on together. If you're still up for doing that,
Yeah, we'll have to get that together, yes, definitely.
I'll maybe get back.